Thank you. Good morning. This hearing of the Senate Appropriations will please come to order. We're here for a very important reason, and the first is to thank all of the young people who are here today for your commitment to coming and fighting for yourself and for many others. To talk about the Special Diabetes Program and its critical work that supports life-saving research for millions of kids and people across our country and the world who are living with type 1 diabetes. And in particular, we are here today to hear from kids living with type 1 diabetes about why this program matters. So before I get started, I want to welcome all of you to Washington, D.C. and to Congress. I know many of you have traveled from all over the country to be here today, and I want you to know that your voices make a huge difference in making sure that Congress takes action to treat and eventually cure type 1 diabetes. And the Special Diabetes Program plays a crucial role in fighting this disease because it supports NIH research into type 1 diabetes that has led to breakthroughs in diabetes prevention and treatment. Given this program does so much good for so many families back home, it should be no surprise that it has strong bipartisan support here in Congress. I was pleased to work with Senator Alexander to reauthorize this program back in 2020 when we led the HELP Committee together. And Vice Chair Collins is such a tremendous leader in that effort and is a tireless champion on this issue as co-chair of the Diabetes Caucus along with Senator Shaheen. So I'm very glad to have Senator and Vice Chair Collins who will lead this hearing today. I've heard from so many patients fighting this disease. It can be really hard. Here in Congress, we need to make things easier and give people hope and show we are serious about breakthroughs to prevent, treat, and cure diabetes. That includes continuing to authorize this crucial program and to support it and hopefully to reauthorize it again this year. And we also need to make life-saving insulin affordable for everyone, something Senator Collins and Senator Shaheen are working tirelessly on. I am going to keep pushing to grow the bipartisan momentum that we have for fighting this disease with everything we've got, and I know with the incredible advocates from this year's Children's Congress, we are going to keep making progress. We're going to keep investing in life-changing research and eventually cure type 1 diabetes. And on that note, I am very proud to turn it over the gavel to Vice Chair Collins, who will lead this hearing. Senator Collins.
Well, before Senator Murray has to leave, I want to first thank you for your leadership on this issue and for allowing me to share the honor of chairing this important hearing. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our nation's capital. This is our 12th Children's Congress and the first since the pandemic. It's wonderful to host you and your families at the Senate Appropriations Committee. And again, I want to especially thank our chair for sharing the honor of chairing this Children's Congress. As the founding co-chair of the Senate Diabetes Caucus, I've long promoted diabetes research as one of my top priorities. Your advocacy for the life-changing research to prevent, treat, and one day cure diabetes, type 1 diabetes, motivates me. I think of all the terrific children with type 1 whom I've met over the years. Many I've watched grow up. Children like Aiden Sweeney, whom I first met at age 4, and he turned 21 this year. Ruby Whitmore, a young teen who is my summer neighbor. Nicole Wiesendunger is a Maine teacher who has lived with diabetes for more than 35 years, and she's married to my nephew. And so many more, including our Maine delegate, who will be testifying shortly. You inspire me, you inspire all of us. More than 160 delegates have traveled to Washington from every state in the Union and 5 foreign countries. In fact, this morning I met someone from the United Kingdom who is here as well. You're all here to share your personal stories with members of Congress. You'll tell us what it's like to live with type 1 diabetes and why it is critical for Congress to fund the research necessary to discover better treatments, more effective technology, and one day a cure. Your personal stories really matter. They motivate senators and representatives to get involved in the cause. And I want to tell you my personal story of how I got involved. One of the very first meetings I had as a brand new senator in 1997 was with families who had children with type 1. I'll never forget this 10-year-old boy looking up at me and saying, "Senator Collins, I wish I could just take one day off from having diabetes, Christmas or my birthday." And of course, he never can. And that's why I started the bipartisan Senate Diabetes Caucus that very year. Since then, federal funding for diabetes research has almost quadrupled. The federal government now invests more than $1.2 billion for diabetes research each year. Funding, as the chair mentioned, for the Special Diabetes Program in particular, has contributed to phenomenal discoveries, including several advances since we last convened. For example, research conducted by the SDP-funded TrialNet program demonstrated for the first time that early preventive treatment with a drug targeting the immune system can delay the onset of clinical T1D for some at-risk individuals. The FDA also approved the first cell therapy to treat individuals with type 1. SDP supported clinical trial data that contributed to that advancement. Technology has also advanced. I remember the very first Children's Congress that I chaired. We didn't have continuous glucose monitors back then or artificial pancreas systems. People have big, bulky pumps with them. They were checking their blood sugar. They were taking injections. We've come a long ways. Another important component of the Special Diabetes Program supports prevention and treatment services for American Indians and Alaska Natives who experience type 2 diabetes at nearly 3 times the national average. Without an extension, both programs are at risk of expiring at the end of this fiscal year. That's September 30th. So we simply must pass legislation to reauthorize SDP. It has strong bipartisan support. 60 senators signed a letter that Senator Shaheen and I authored to Senate leaders advocating for this program. So please ask your senators and your representatives to support the extension of this vital program. And there's encouraging news. Just last month, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, on which the chair and I both serve, overwhelmingly approved the SDP Reauthorization Act that I introduced with Senator Shaheen. Our bill would fund both components of the Special Diabetes Program through December 2025. And here's the good news. Our bill contains a $20 million annual increase per program. And that would be the first increase in 20 years. So let's get that done. Finally, let me touch on another pressing issue which the chair mentioned, and that's insulin affordability. And I know that many of you will be educating members about this today. As some of you have experienced firsthand, the cost of insulin has soared in recent years, and this life-saving treatment has become unaffordable for far too many individuals with diabetes. So we need comprehensive legislation to reform the whole insulin market, and we need to put a monthly cap on the cost. And that is what legislation Senator Shaheen and I have introduced would do. Let me just close by saying it is so inspiring to look out and see that wave of blue in town today. When I was coming into work this morning, I met a whole group of you, and it lifted my spirits immediately. It is inspiring. Your passion and advocacy, your hope for a cure are contagious. And together, I'm confident that we will continue our progress and achieve that goal. Thank you. And I now have a brief statement from the co-chair of the Diabetes Caucus, Jean Shaheen of New Hampshire. She has a constituent who's going to be testifying before us today. Here's what Senator Shaheen said. I welcome all the witnesses and the more than 160 advocates that have traveled to Washington, D.C. to participate in today's 12th Annual Children's Congress. Your relentless efforts to find a cure for type 1 and for all those living with the disease, including my granddaughter, are an inspiration. In particular, I want to welcome Elise Cataldo and her family from New Hampshire, whom I had the pleasure of meeting in our state. Elise is among the very best. There's no better advocate for those living with type 1. I urge my colleagues to listen to each witness closely, truly hear their stories, and finally act on legislation to improve the lives of those living with type 1. That means increasing investments in research to find a cure, such as the Special Diabetes Program Reauthorization Act, authored by Senator Collins and myself. But it also means passing legislation to comprehensively and permanently solve insulin affordability, namely our bipartisan Insulin Act, which Senator Collins and I authored. It's kind of weird to refer to myself in third person, but I'm reading Senator Shaheen's statement. Until the day comes when we finally have a cure, no patient should be forced to risk their lives rationing their daily insulin. Thank you again for coming today to share your stories. I wish you a productive and memorable Children's Congress and hope to see you again in D.C. very soon. Thank you, Senator Shaheen, for that statement. Well, thank you all for being here. And if there are any of our members who want to make a very brief statement before we turn, are we all set? All right, we will introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Dr. Griffin Rogers, the director of the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive Kidney Diseases at the National Institutes of Health. He's no stranger to our committee. He's a familiar face to the Children's Congress. He assumed his current position in 2007, has testified before us at each and every Children's Congress. And I admire him so much, and I'm delighted to welcome him back. Next, we will hear from Dr. Aaron Kowalski, the president and CEO of JDRF. He's the first person with type 1 diabetes to lead JDRF. We had the pleasure of having Dr. Kowalski testify as part of the 2019 Children's Congress. That was the last one we had before the pandemic, and I'm delighted to welcome him back. Prior to his appointment as president, he served as JDRF's chief mission officer. That means he oversaw significant advances in diabetes research. Now, our next witness comes to us from a very different background: R&B songwriting and music productions. I'm pleased to welcome Jimmy Jam Harris to testify before our committee. Jimmy Jam is an award-winning music producer who's been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. His son, Max, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 2 years old. Jimmy Jam is here to advocate on behalf of Max, who's now a thriving young adult and is sitting right over there, and to inspire other kids and teens living with diabetes. And with due respect to those three wonderful witnesses, we're then going to hear from the stars of the show. We're going to hear from two delegates. First, Maria Muayed. I practiced all this. Maria Muayed, there, I did it, from Yarmouth, Maine. Maria is 10 years old and was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when she was 7. She is proud to be a type 1 diabetes advocate and has helped increase awareness at her school. We will also then hear from Elise Cataldo from New Hampshire. Elise doesn't remember life without diabetes, since she was diagnosed at just over a year old. But she hasn't let type 1 diabetes hold her back. She's an extremely active teenager. She's an extraordinary athlete, playing soccer, basketball, and lacrosse. Outside of school and sports, Elise is passionate about educating those around her about life with T1D. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll start with Dr. Rogers. Thank you, Dr. Rogers.
Well, thank you so much. Chair Murray, Vice Chair Collins, Senator Shaheen, members of the committee, thank you for this invitation to testify and for your support of type 1 diabetes research. Research supported through the Special Diabetes Program, or SDP, has ushered in a new era of type 1 diabetes management and continues to improve the lives of people living with this disease. I'd like to recognize my fellow witnesses. All of you, everyone here today, are true champions in advancing diabetes research. NIH's clinical research studies would not be possible without the participation and support of people like you and those you represent across this country. Thank you. This year, we celebrate the SDP's silver anniversary. For 25 years, SDP-supported research has sought ways to prevent, treat, and cure type 1 diabetes and its complications. This enduring investment has enabled us to take on challenges beyond what we could support with NIH's regular appropriations and to perform critical trials unlikely to be done by the private sector. There's much progress to report since I last testified here in person 4 years ago. In November of 2022, the FDA approved the first early preventive treatment that can delay clinical diagnosis of type 1 diabetes for at least 3 years. That's 3 years without having to take insulin or check your blood glucose, 3 years toward preventing or delaying diabetes complications. Key research underlying this landmark approval stemmed from clinical trials conducted by SDP-supported type 1 diabetes TrialNet. That trial was made possible by decades of NIH and SDP-supported research by TrialNet and others that built a paradigm-shifting understanding of how type 1 diabetes progresses from normal glucose levels to clinical disease. That knowledge also helped identify potential therapies and made prevention trials possible. TrialNet continues to test new prevention approaches with trials ongoing and others ready to launch. There's also been significant progress on ways to ease the burden of daily glucose management. When I first testified about type 1 diabetes 16 years ago, the goal was clear: get an artificial pancreas device into the hands of those who need it. Now we have 6 artificial pancreas devices on the market. 5 of these had SDP support, and 2 of those devices, the SDP supported both the development and clinical trials, underscoring the value of long-term research support. Importantly, some of these devices are approved for children as young as 2, which can be life-changing for them and for their families. Looking into the future, NIDDK is supporting the development of the next generation of artificial pancreas devices, including fully automated systems. Toward this goal of a bionic pancreas, which requires minimal user input and can automate insulin doses, one was just approved just this May. Another research focus is ensuring the new devices benefit all, including groups that are understudied by industry. Finally, we continue to search for a biological cure for type 1 diabetes, a high priority for people with the disease and their families. This includes research to understanding how insulin-producing beta cells are lost and how they can be protected and replaced. Scientists are gaining new insights into how beta cells develop, finding ways to make replacements in the lab. And they're also devising ways to protect lab-grown cells from the body's immune attack. You might be interested to know that SDP-funded research also provides benefits beyond type 1 diabetes. Blood glucose management technologies benefit those with type 2 diabetes, as does research on complications that affects organs like the heart and the eyes. These broad benefits will expand as cutting-edge technology such as artificial intelligence and machine learning are applied to the big data that's being generated by SDP-supported studies. On the silver anniversary of the SDP, we celebrate the incredible progress made possible by this program and recognize the SDP value as a long-term investment in health. But we must continue to build on our remarkable progress. We look forward to achieving our ultimate goal: preventing and curing type 1 diabetes. Thank you, and I'll be pleased to answer questions when time is available. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kowalski.
Chair Murray, Vice Chair Collins, Senator Shaheen, and members of the committee, thank you for welcoming all of our amazing 2023 Children's Congress delegates, their guardians, and our special guests. Also, thank you for allowing me to testify before you today. I'm honored to be here and be joined by Dr. Rogers and 3 of our incredible JDRF advocates to highlight the important progress advanced by the Special Diabetes Program, or SDP, and our hopes for the future. I'm Dr. Aaron Kowalski, Chief Executive Officer for JDRF. I'm a trained scientist, and I've been fortunate to work for JDRF for the past 19 years, 4 of which in my current role. Like every delegate here and far too many people across the world, my family and I are impacted by type 1. My family's experience dates to 1977, when my brother Steve, out of the blue, was diagnosed at just the age of 3. And then I was diagnosed a few years later when I was 13. Grappling day-to-day with T1D was difficult, very, very difficult then, and still impacts every aspect of our lives today. But we have good news to share. Because of your steadfast leadership, Senator Collins and Shaheen, and the strong bipartisan support in Congress, the Special Diabetes Program has fundamentally changed what it means to live with type 1 diabetes. It's put new life-changing therapies in our hands and brought us closer to cures. The SDP's sister program, the Special Diabetes Program for Indians, is yielding similar significant results. We must keep this momentum going so we can capitalize on the progress to date and ultimately realize cures. Since our last Children's Congress in 2019, we now have on the market a therapy, as Dr. Rogers pointed out, that can delay the onset of type 1 for up to 3 years. In June, the FDA approved the first cell therapy for adults with T1D who are unable to maintain their blood glucose levels due to severe hypoglycemia problems. This therapy allows some patients to live without external insulin for several years. The SDP-supported Clinical Islet Transplantation Consortium played a major role in this pivotal step forward to identifying cures. Now, most delegates, as you see here in the pit, are wearing AP systems now, which is an amazing thing for me to see. And the SDP funded the trials that led to the approvals of the systems that I use, many of the kids here use, and people around the country are using, making diabetes much more manageable. And I can't wait to see what's coming next. Continued SDP support would enable several long-term T1D-oriented research programs and clinical trial networks to continue their important work. Plus, it will enable researchers to explore new opportunities. For example, SGLT2 inhibitors are not yet approved for people with type 1. We need to develop strategies to ensure these drugs can be safely used by people with type 1, which could reduce the costly and devastating impacts of heart and kidney disease. The SDP is indeed improving and saving lives and creating hope for those living with this disease. Our future is bright. Senators Collins and Shaheen, we are tremendously grateful for your leadership. And committee members, we are greatly appreciative of your support. I know many of you are among the 60 senators who signed a letter led by Senators Shaheen and Collins recognizing the importance of the SDP and its renewal. Thank you. I urge you also to all vote in favor of S 1855, which would extend SDP funding through December 2025. The program expires this September, so please act swiftly. JDRF is doing its part, having invested over $2.5 billion in research to date. I must also mention, until we have cures, people with diabetes need access to affordable insulin. We're making progress, but we must do more. JDRF urges Congress to pass the Bipartisan Insulin Act of 2023, which will establish a $35 per month copay cap for people with commercial insurance and includes other provisions that would make insulin more affordable for everyone, irregardless of their insulin or insurance status. We need your continued support. Thank you again for allowing me to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Mr. Harris, welcome.
Talk, how about that? Okay. Thank you, Chair Murray, Vice Chair Collins, Senator Shaheen, and members of the committee. My name is Jimmy Jam. I'm a songwriter, producer, musician, and recording artist. Today, I am honored to be testifying not as a member of the music community, but as a parent whose family has been impacted by type 1 diabetes for the past 2 decades. My son Max was just 2 years old when he was first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. At the time, I thought I knew what T1D was, but I didn't really understand what it meant. Type 1 diabetes is something it doesn't affect you until it really affects you. And once it does, you are completely immersed in it. Our lives quickly revolved around Max's diabetes. Late nights working on music for me quickly became working on waking my son up to test and manage his blood sugar levels. Now, Max is now in his 20s, and we're glad that instead of those constant finger pokes to test him, he now uses a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM. Those life-changing devices never would have come to market as quickly as they did, or perhaps even at all, without research funded by the Special Diabetes Program and JDRF's funding and extensive involvement. But even with the great new technologies to help control T1D, we can never take Max's levels for granted. That's the thing with diabetes. The second that you think you have it down, something else changes and now the number is too high or too low. Congress needs to renew the SDP so that researchers can discover new breakthroughs to help families with type 1 diabetes. Through Max's eyes, I've also seen the crisis facing millions of Americans: insulin affordability. I remember when Max was young, we went on a family trip to New York. And in the chaos of packing, we forgot to pack his insulin. Now, I didn't think it would be a big deal because we had insurance, but then our insurance wouldn't cover it. We had already used our refill. So we ended up having to pay at that point in time probably a couple $100 out of pocket just to get his life-saving insulin. Now, we were fortunate that we could afford the cost, but even as a child, Max realized the problem. I'll never forget how he asked me that day, "What about the people that can't afford that?" There are so many people across the country who can't afford their insulin, and over the years, the cost has only gotten higher. People like Max need insulin to survive. I've heard heartbreaking stories of families forced to ration insulin because it's too expensive. Congress should make sure no family has to make these impossible choices to keep their child alive. Aside from my roles as father and musician, I am also chairman emeritus of the Recording Academy. That's the organization behind the Grammy Awards. Like the members of this committee, I know what it's like to sit in a contentious meeting and worry that no one will ever agree because our differences are too great. But I've also learned if I start playing music, I can look around and I can see the commonalities of everyone's head moving at the same time in the same way. We all may have our differences, but there are things we can all agree upon. Music is one of those things. But type 1 diabetes should be one of those things we can all agree upon too. It is a nonpartisan condition. Diabetes doesn't care if you're Democrat or a Republican, and we can all agree there should be research to improve the lives of those with diabetes. And we can also all agree that insulin should be affordable to all that need it. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your testimony. Maria, welcome from the great state of Maine to Washington, D.C.
Chair Murray, Vice Chair Collins, Senator Shaheen, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm honored to represent my fellow delegates at JDRF 2023 Children's Congress in this hearing. I'm Maria Moayed from Yarmouth, Maine. I'm 10 years old and I have been living with type 1 diabetes for 3 years. As you can tell from looking at all the delegates in front of you, we're a diverse group of people. Some of us are in preschool and some of us are about to go to college. Some like me love math and others, well, they prefer other classes at school. What brings us together is that we all live with type 1 diabetes. We know what it feels like to live the highs and lows of diabetes, literally. My family and I are the first-generation Americans and proud Mainers. We know that with hard work, we can do anything. Every delegate knows this too, and that's why we're here. My dream and my family's big hope is to cure type 1 diabetes. Together with your help, we can do it. The Special Diabetes Program funds research that is leading us to cures. We don't have one today, but someday we will. And research from the SDP is important to make it happen. It's going to be amazing when we cure type 1 diabetes. There's so much I'm looking forward to. When there's a cure, I won't have to wear my devices that itch and hurt, and that bring me unwanted attention from my classmates. When they make noises. When there's a cure, I won't have to eat food to treat a low after I brush my teeth, which is just as annoying as any device I have to wear. When there's a cure, I'll be able to spend more time doing things I love, like FaceTiming my family and playing outside with my friends. Until we cure this disease, I would also like if everyone could afford diabetes supplies they need to live. All the medicine and tools I need to stay alive are very expensive, but they're necessary, and they work. I hope that you can find a way to make for that to happen. When I grow up, I want to become a pediatrician so I can help other people, including kids with diabetes. It would be even better if by the time I'm a pediatrician, kids don't get type 1 diabetes anymore. The only way that will happen is if you keep funding diabetes research. Thank you very much for letting me share my hopes for the future, and thank you, Senator Collins, and all the members of the committee for all that you're doing to help us.
Thank you, Maria. Elise, welcome.
Thank you. Chair Murray, Vice Chair Collins, Senator Shaheen, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about my life with type 1 diabetes. My name is Elise Cataldo, I'm 15 years old, and I'm from Hooksett, New Hampshire. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 18 months old. Many of my fellow delegates here can remember a time without diabetes. I cannot. Life with diabetes is the only life I've ever known. However, my life with diabetes today is drastically different than it was when I was diagnosed. Back then, we didn't have the same tools we have today. Continuous glucose monitors, like the one I am wearing today, were not yet widely adopted by the type 1 diabetes community. Insulin pumps with artificial pancreas technology were not yet available. Thanks to brilliant researchers, clinical trial participants, advocates, JDRF, and the overwhelming support of senators like you, the tools I have today are vastly superior. In fact, I currently use an insulin pump that has an algorithm called Control-IQ that gives me more insulin when I need it, and it decreases the amount of insulin I get to help prevent dangerously low blood sugars. The Special Diabetes Program, or SDP, funded the final clinical trial for this algorithm. That clinical trial led to its FDA approval, and my life is so much better because of it. I can sleep better at night, and so can my parents because of SDP-funded research. I'm not alone. I can guarantee many of my fellow delegates here utilize this or other systems like it, and they were all helped in one way or another by the SDP. Thank you for your past support of this critical program. Today, I am incredibly proud to say that I live as close to a normal life as possible. I am active as I play soccer and basketball. I'm able to spend time with my family, where I'm the oldest of 5, and for example, our most recent camping trip. In a few years, I hope to go to college, become a D1 athlete, and study psychology so that I can become a child life specialist. But as normal as I look on the outside, type 1 diabetes is always in the back of my mind. It affects every decision I make, every day. When I'm playing soccer, I need to ensure my blood sugar is in the right range. If it's too high, I can become fatigued, but if it's too low, I can become disoriented and even pass out. If this sounds like a lot for a 15-year-old to keep track of, you're right, it is. Many Americans with diabetes have one more thing to keep track of, whether or not they can even afford their insulin. I'm incredibly lucky to say that I'm able to access the insulin I need. It makes me so disappointed that there are people just like me who have trouble affording their insulin and have to make terrible decisions, like whether to buy groceries or insulin, which are both things that we can't live without. I hope that the members of the Senate and the rest of Congress can work together to solve this problem. The diabetes community needs your help. One day soon, I hope to live free from type 1 diabetes. You play a critical role in making that a reality. Please fund the SDP and continue to fight for me, the 163 kids here today, and the millions more in America affected by this disease. Thank you for listening to my story, and thank you for your support. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Elise. We'll now do a round of 5 minutes per senator for questions, although I'm sure that we could all go on way longer than that. Let me start with Maria. Maria, first of all, thank you for that inspiring testimony. I know that you and your family moved to Maine from Iraq and that you were diagnosed here in Maine with type 1 diabetes. I want to ask you whether you think that having type 1 led to your decision to become a pediatrician when you grow up.
Yes, it did lead to me wanting to become a pediatrician because I know that only kids and adults with type 1 diabetes will understand the pain and struggle that they go through. And I would like to help kids better understand that.
Thank you. Dr. Rogers, I appreciate your strong leadership and all that you have done for the community with type 1 diabetes and the special diabetes program for Indians and Native Alaskans as well. I want you to look ahead and answer 2 questions for me. One, what would happen to those research efforts if Congress failed to extend the special diabetes program, if it just went away on September 30th? And second, since I don't think we're going to allow that to happen, I'd like you to give us a sense of what exciting developments are on the horizon.
Well, thank you for that question, Senator Collins. I think that if there were to be a circumstance in which the funds would lapse, of course, our regular appropriations would continue to fund existing studies in type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, but we certainly wouldn't be able to do it at the pace that we're able to do it now. Clearly, in order to recruit people for clinical trials, we really follow a philosophy that we don't want to subject individuals and their families to these trials if we're not sure we can conclude them. And that would be an important aspect of what would happen.
So you're saying that the special diabetes program allows you to achieve breakthroughs much more quickly?
Absolutely, absolutely. In terms of your second question, what looking towards the future, what would we like to see with these funds? You heard from Dr. Kowalski about the use of drugs that are currently approved for type 2 diabetes, including so-called SGLT2 drugs and GLP-1 receptor agonists. These drugs have not only the ability to lower blood sugar and actually reduce weight in many instances, but they also have a protective effect on the heart and the kidneys. These complications of the disease are really what is driving a lot of the cost associated with it. And so we really look forward to those types of continuing and making sure that those drugs are safe and effective for individuals with type 1 diabetes as well.
Thank you. I'm going to do a second round later, so I'm going to yield to Senator Tester.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Collins. First of all, it is great to have everybody here in the blue shirts. The diabetes folks know how to lobby, I'll tell you that. Pretty impressive. Let me tell you a story about me. I came to school in 7th grade, and my best buddy wasn't there. and I wondered why. And he came back to school, and he had been diagnosed with diabetes. I have watched, that was 1969, by the way, and Jimmy Jam in 1969, you know what he paid for a vial of insulin? $2.03. That $300 vial of insulin today was $2.03. That's, by the way, with a patent that was passed along to the pharmaceutical companies. Now, the delivery system has changed, and we talked about that. But I've watched him for the last 54 years go through life, and it has not been easy. And watching him and the challenges he's had to deal with every day because he has diabetes has made me personally very angry because life is much more complicated for him than it is for me. My question is for you, Dr. Rogers. Congratulations on 25 years. You've talked about some of the successes you've had, and putting diabetes off for 3 years is no small. I mean, that's 1,000 days that you get, okay? The glucose monitoring, the artificial pancreas, the delivery system where you don't have to prick your finger and take your pants down and give yourself a shot in the leg every day. I mean, all that stuff is admirable, and I will preface my question by saying, you put if the R&D money that Senator Collins and Senator Shaheen put up, I'm going to support it because it's really important. Research is really critical in this area. But my question is you talked about a biological cure, which I think is the goal here. The goal here is not to have an artificial pancreas. The goal here is not to have an early hypertension drug because we have a biological cure, whether it's through stem cell or some other method, which is far beyond my ability to understand as a farmer. Just having it so kids and adults can go through and live a normal life and not have to deal with some of the challenges that are out there that diabetes creates. So my question is how close are we? We've been at this for 25 years, $2.5 billion, Dr. Kowalski said we put in. I mean, it's real money. These folks are real people. These are real kids. They're the reason we're in this position. Tell me what we got to do to get a biological cure.
Well, thank you for your question, Senator. The SDP is supporting and has supported a group of scientists called the Human Islet Research Network, or HERN. And HERN is trying to very much understand and move towards the goal that you set forward to try to take stem cells, either from the person's skin or some other place, transform it into beta cells producing insulin, and get those cells back into the patient, which would be a true biologic cure. The problem is, of course, that those same cells would be subjected to the immune response, which caused the type 1 diabetes in the first place. An alternate way would be to develop these cells and somehow encapsulate it to override the immune effect, and that's being actively studied as well. But at the same time, we have a group of investigators looking at prevention. It may be better to prevent the disease than to actually cure it. And what we know is that individuals that you see here have a genetic predisposition towards diabetes, and for some reason, there is a trigger that turns on their immune system against those cells producing in the pancreas. And if we were able to determine what that trigger is, be it a food, be it a virus or a bacteria, we may be able to prevent that unwanted autoimmune disease. So we have a program called TEDdy, which is really actively studying that, and we hope to report to you the results of these studies. These are kids that we first brought into the study when they were born, and we studied them until they're 15 years of age. And that's about to come to a conclusion. And we have a lot of samples that have been collected. And this is the first instance in which we're going to be using artificial intelligence and machine learning to discern patterns of what it is likely to be the trigger And it's quite likely to be more than one trigger that's turning that on. So that's sort of another, obviously it's prudent to explore multiple pathways as well. But that's certainly two of the things I can tell you, Senator.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Senator Collins.
Thank you. Senator Kennedy.
Chair, and thanks to all of our witnesses. Dr. Kowalski, thank you for giving so much. Have you ever heard the expression yada, yada, yada? What does that mean?
Yada, 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 man?
Yeah.
On and on and on?
Yeah. We've had so much yada, yada, yada about affordable insulin. Not from people like you, but from us. We've been nibbling around the edges for years. Dr. Rogers, thank you for giving so much. Let me ask you a question. Do you have health insurance?
Fortunately, as a government employee, I do have health
And
insurance.
it's pretty good, isn't it?
It's pretty good, Senator.
Now, who do you think needs affordable insulin? Who do you think needs capping the price of insulin at $30 or so more? You or a homeless or an uninsured person?
Was that to me, Senator, or to
You.
Dr. Kowalski? Well, as you asked the question, I think the person who's less available to afford it would probably benefit more.
Yeah, we got 30 million people who are uninsured in this country. And some of them are diabetic, too. Now, Senator Shaheen and Senator Collins have a great bill. Senator Warnock and I have a bill, too, on insulin. It's called the Affordable Insulin Now Act. And we're working closely with Senator Collins and Senator Shaheen. Our bill would cover everybody. Everybody. Whether you have health insurance or you're uninsured, because a lot of people become uninsured. Now, I know our health insurance companies, and God bless them, they're trying to work with us to lower the cost of insulin, and they have these programs, they call them patient assistance programs. So if you're uninsured and you can't afford your insulin, they'll work with you. But have you ever tried to apply for one of those programs? Have either of you, any of you? Oh my God. First, the application process. The fine print to apply, there's so much of it. You could hide a dead body in there and nobody'd ever find it. Number two, they send the medicine to your doctor, not to you. So if you got a job or if you don't have a job, you got to go to the expense of driving all the way to your doctor's office, probably have to pay your doctor to get the medication. I mean, that's a special kind of stupid. These free programs only cover one or two forms of insulin. And get this, yeah, they'll give you cheap insulin, maybe free insulin for a month or 3 months or at best a year. And then after a year, you go in one day and instead of $30, it's $567.23. And you go, oh my God, I got to go sell blood plasma to be able to afford it. We need to stop nibbling around the edges. We need to be smart enough to figure this out. And the cost, I think it could be done for $250 million a year. And I'm not talking about taking out a reverse mortgage on Alaska and borrowing more money. I'm talking about finding it in our budget. Elise, let me ask you a quick question. You probably don't know the answer. I had to look it up. But if I started counting to 1 billion right now, right this moment, in 2023, and I counted, y'all listen to this, you may know the answer. I counted one number a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I counted all day and all night. And I counted in the shower. And I counted between bites of a Pop-Tart at breakfast. I keep counting and counting. How long do you think it'd take me to count to 1 billion?
A very long time.
You know how long? Right, I told you you were smart. It would take me 32 years. For 1 billion, I'd be 55. It would be 2055. I wouldn't make it. Now, you know how big the federal budget is? That's just 1 billion, folks. The federal budget is $6,000 billion every year. And we can't find 250 million to cap the price of insulin? Let's do it right. No more yada, yada, yada.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you. I want to start by both congratulating and welcoming my constituents, Meredith, Mira, Sylvia, and Talon. Welcome to our nation's capital, and I want to thank you for your role in the JDRF 2023 Children's Congress and for your continued advocacy on behalf of Wisconsinites with diabetes. Your advocacy really helps drive the work of Congress, and I want to thank you for using your voices for this important cause. This is for Dr. Rogers. The Max McGee Diabetes Research Center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin is focused on early identification and prevention of type 1 diabetes. Thanks to funding from the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, the center developed a novel and cutting-edge blood test that can detect inflammation associated with type 1 diabetes up to 7 years before the disease's onset. This test is already helping researchers better understand how patients are responding to new therapeutic interventions and strengthens our understanding of the development of type 1 diabetes. So, Dr. Rogers, can you describe how research that focuses on the development of type 1 diabetes leads to progress in preventing juvenile diabetes?
Yes, thank you, Senator. That's outstanding work that's being done by investigators in your state. You know, I have to say the Special Diabetes Program, as I mentioned in my introduction, over the years of this continuous funding has really changed the way we think about diabetes in the various stages. It's not that you have it or you don't. We know that it progresses through several stages until one actually develops clinical disease associated with abnormal blood sugar levels. And it's getting the disease in people who are extremely high risk after they have antibodies, but before their blood sugar gets out of whack. It's critically important because that leads to the development of studies such as was reported by Senator Collins and has been mentioned, this drug teplizumab, for example, which works in the immune system to actually stop the immune system from damaging those insulin-producing cells. So having ways of defining the disease much earlier is critically important for prevention. And we continue to work with investigators throughout the country to try to come up with a more precise, easy, and a more accurate way of detecting that, just for that purpose.
Great. Thank you. Also, Dr. Rogers, thanks to the Special Diabetes Program, people with type 1 diabetes are living longer than ever, but there's much more that we can do to improve the lives of those with type 1 and make sure that we're working to reduce complications. This is especially important for children living with type 1 diabetes, including the Wisconsinites who I welcomed earlier. Dr. Rogers, what are some of the understudied complications of type 1 diabetes that you hope will be examined in the future, and how, what are the gaps or things that we haven't studied enough, and how will this research improve the lives of many in this audience?
Two aspects to that. I'll answer your question in two ways. Number one is there are understudied groups of individuals with type 1 diabetes that unfortunately industry isn't studying that much, and this is where SDP fills in a gap. Those understudied individuals include those who are pregnant, those who have frequent episodes of low blood glucose, or this condition that Dr. Kowalski mentioned of impaired hypoglycemia, when their blood sugar dips very low. Older adults and very young adults are understudied. Those with lower in education levels are also tend to be understudied by industry. Now, with respect to complications of the disease, something that we really need to focus on, because this is where a lot of the funding for diabetes comes in. People with heart disease, and unfortunately, it looks like people that have type 1 diabetes may have a different form of heart disease in terms of its manifestations. Diabetic foot ulcers is something that I think is very much understudied. We've begun a consortium to study foot ulcers, because once people get this, you may not be aware, but the mortality associated with having foot ulcers actually is very close to some people with certain types of cancers. And so those are two areas. We've learned a lot in terms of diabetic eye disease and other manifestations. But if I had to pick two complications, that would be where we want to focus. And we have studies already developed in that regard.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Senator Collins, and I want to thank everyone for being here today. This means so much, and I hope you always remember this day, but for your effort in trying to make your situation, make your lives better, you're playing a part of it today, and I appreciate all of you coming. Dr. Rogers, my question is for you, and it's more state-specific. Mississippi is the state I represent, a very large state, but a pretty low population for such a large state, a lot of rural areas. And so many times we have so many patients that go undiagnosed and their chronic disease complications just skyrocket. But the specialists are few and far between, and the patients usually have to travel a long way for their appointments. And we've seen positive impacts of the special diabetes programs and research at the NIH. However, rural communities seem to face such a greater challenge. I have more family members that suffer from diabetes. I mean, everyone in Mississippi is very aware of what this, because we do have one of the highest rates. But during your time as the director of the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases, how have researchers focused on rural populations in their research and their studies? Because this is a great concern in my state.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. There is a lot of activity in Mississippi. I've visited there multiple times to actually speak, and you're right, it is rural disease. We have been following and working with the Centers for Disease Control, who, as you know, follow the incidence and prevalence of certain diseases like diabetes, not only at a state level, but even sort of at a county level, to try to understand what are some of the factors that are contributing to the prevalence and changing in the prevalence of the disease. We're also learning, for example, that in a study that we work with the CDC, it's called SEARCH. And what SEARCH is now telling us, of course, everything in government has an acronym. So SEARCH is an acronym, which I won't go into at the moment, but we're really searching for diabetes in youth and adolescents. And we're finding that not only are we seeing an increase in the numbers of kids with type 1 diabetes in certain rural areas that was totally unexpected, But we're also seeing type 2 diabetes, for example, in kids as young as 10, 11, or 12. And what we know about type 2 diabetes in these kids is that, A, it doesn't respond at the same way that drugs that are commonly available respond in adults with the disease. And secondly, it's much more aggressive disease. This is type 2 diabetes, not type 1. It seems to be associated with the development of complications much, much earlier than what we see in adults, which typically takes 10 or 15 years of the disease. And so these are studies that are really being actively pursued both at the state and the county level to try to understand this. And using new sophisticated GPS to actually target these. We have some young investigators who are coming up with some ideas that will be subject to testing. So we're very much focused on the disparities that exist in rural America, and that's something that it really is something that's very important to me.
Can you tell me that how we as Congress can help address some of those issues? Is there anything specific because of the lack of quality of health care in so many rural areas? Is there anything specific we as Congress can do to improve that? Well,
Certainly your support for this program and other programs I think are certainly critically important. We want to make sure that we continue to have investigators in the pipeline to continue investigative inquiries, to be right there to answer questions that they pose. And so ensuring that we can not only maintain pivotal clinical trials in diabetes and other areas, but obviously funding the next generation of investigators, both to treat patients appropriately, but also to uncover ideas that we're not even aware of yet, to make sure they're there to help us move forward. And your ongoing support for those efforts, I think, is very much valuable.
Well, I just thank all of you for being here. I thank you for your efforts. And I do have one young man, 17 years old, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and he has the CGM pump, and it has changed his life. I just want that opportunity for every child that suffers from this. I want them to have every opportunity that we can possibly provide. So thank you for doing the research. Thank you for your diligence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. Thank our presenters, and to Maria and Elise, thank you all for sharing your stories with us. Maybe one question real quick for both of you. What would you think is something most people don't understand about diabetes, as far as childhood diabetes? Something that they just don't understand. Unless your families and you all live with it, no one else would understand that. Anything very quickly?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand that it's ongoing. You never get a break from it. You can't ever just say, I don't feel like doing this today. And a lot of people get it confused with type 2 diabetes, which is really frustrating because it's not something we ever wanted to live with. We were given it. And I think that's just really frustrating, especially as children here. A lot of adults don't want to give time to listen to us all the time, and even though some of the times we know.
You keep telling your story, okay? Yeah. Maria?
I think that, and I feel that the kids in my school, at least, they think that I don't need my CGM and my pump on all the time, and they just come and like poke at it and touch it. Yeah. And when the nurse comes up to my classroom, they always crowd around me when my blood sugar is going up or down.
Honey, you just keep talking. You just keep explaining to them. Trust me, they want to know, and I'm sure most people want to help. But understanding is the most important thing, and educating them is something you can do and nobody else can do. And I think you never give up and never be ashamed. Make sure that you make people understand what we all can do working together. I want to also recognize Mr. Chris Ward from Charlestown, West Virginia. He's here today, and I want to thank him. Let me say this to all the family members. Thank you all for the support you give your loved ones and what you do every day, because people don't understand. And there's not a family in America that's not been affected one way or another with diabetes. Not one family doesn't have someone in their immediate family, extended family, or close relation. To all of you, let me just say, you're the hope of America. You're sitting here today. You're our hope. I think there's going to be many of you sitting where we're sitting right now, wondering how you can make life better, how you can improve the quality of life. And that's what we're trying to do. We want to make sure that you have the greatest opportunity that anybody in any generation has ever had. We can only do that if you're healthy. And we want to make sure you have that opportunity. But I want to make sure you understand you have to live and grow to be a living, loving, caring adult and give something back. You have a lot to share with a lot of people, how they can live a better life. And as you grow and become responsible for that, you're going to be sharing the greatest gift that you have, and that is the knowledge of knowing the challenges some people have that people don't understand. They just don't. And you being here today, sharing that with us, makes the difference of what we do and support. There's not a person here, Republican or Democrat. You hear a lot about politics. You have united Congress. You made us all understanding. It's not about politics. It is about each individual having the opportunity for quality of life. That's what you're here. That's what you're accomplishing today. And I hope that you understand making an effort to come here today makes a big difference in what we do and how we do our job, and how important it is that we do it as quickly as humanly possible. We had a piece of legislation called the Inflation Reduction Act, which put a cap at $35. We tried to cap all across the board, everybody. No one would ever pay more than $35. We're achieving it a little bit at a time. We got Medicare first. Now we got some companies that were shamed into knowing that they were making excessive profits to come down to 35. We want to make sure that we have a piece of legislation that does it. And I want to thank the chairwoman, my good friend from Maine, and also my good friend from Washington, state of Washington, for what they have done in leading this cause and the charge. And I would say one final thing, Dr. Rogers, on the TEDdy program. That's a very important program. My state of West Virginia has the largest percentage of adult diabetes in the country. We're over 16% of our population has adult, when the national average is about 10%. Can you tell me how that affects in the families and what we can do, and how TEDdy is working to also, I've always said this, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but you can teach a young pup tricks that can help the old dogs. And that's what we've got to do. And these kids can basically help educate a population that doesn't know how effective it is.
Well, that's another. TEDdy is certainly one of these studies that I want to emphasize your points that this is something that families are very much involved. This study identifies kids from birth. They come in periodically, several times a year in the first few years, and then maybe 3 times a year and a quarter, bringing all types of samples, urine, stool, saliva, with very detailed record of when they had colds and
Sure.
whether they received vaccines and the like. So it really is quite labor intensive. But the product of that study is really going to inform us greatly in terms of what some of those triggers are. So TEDdy, again, an acronym, the environmental determinants of diabetes of the young. We're going to learn quite a bit from that, and I would say probably within the next few years. So really stay tuned. And what we learn about that, I think, might give us clues for other autoimmune diseases. That's why I'm saying this SDP is really having benefits beyond its intended purpose. So really stick with it. And again, we really appreciate all of your support, as I'm sure the population in your state does your support.
Yeah, well, let me say this to all of you. Thank you for being here today. You live in the greatest country in the world, the United States of America. And it's not the divided states, it's the United States. Today, you've helped unite us more than you know, making the effort to be here. I want God to bless each and every one of you. Thank you for being here.
Senator Brett.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Collins. I want to tell you how much I appreciate your efforts on this important issue. I am proud to support the work that you and Senator Shaheen are doing, proud to work alongside Senator Kennedy and others. I want to tell you all how important it is you continue to tell your story. So Maria, Elise, the people from my home state, Tori and Violet, where are you? Are you out there? Oh, yes. This makes such a difference. You are changing hearts and minds. For me, it was one of my very dear friends, Elizabeth. She has 2 children diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Her telling her story gave me a window into the struggles and sacrifices each and every one of you make. To all of the mamas out there, wow. Thank you for your vigilance. Hey, and the dads too. We appreciate what you're doing each and every day to make sure that every one of these kids can live a happy and healthy and fulfilled life. Please continue to do what you do so that we can make sure that we do our job. Dr. Rogers, your research is needed. It is important so we can continue to make the right decisions here in this body, in this chamber. Unfortunately, in Alabama, diabetes continues to grow. Approximately 568,000 Alabamians suffer with diabetes. That is 12% of the population in my home state. It is estimated that probably 35,000 of these diagnoses have just recently happened. So my question for you is, this continual increase must be stopped. What are we seeing in the research and the development that tells us where this is coming from? What are the triggers? What do we need to know as we sit here today?
Well, thank you for your question, Senator. What is driving certainly the increase in type 1 diabetes in individuals who historically haven't had, the sort of genetic predisposition seems to be something in environment. And again, I think we're going to learn, as I mentioned earlier from this Teddy study, what are some of those environmental triggers. We're also seeing, in answer to our earlier question, diabetes occurring at a much younger age, type 2 diabetes, and this may be the increase that you're referring to in the state of Alabama in young individuals as well. Some of that is the effect of lifestyle choices in terms of getting less physical activity, sort of being involved mostly behind a screen, the video screen or a television screen or some other screen.
Put those devices down.
And not being as active as you may remember, our food choices, for example. Those seem to be contributing to being overweight, and that in itself acts as it makes the insulin that's in our body not work as well as it should, a condition called insulin resistance. And so I think, there are multiple factors that are driving it, but it certainly is related to a change in the environment. One final thing that I would say, and it certainly is true in Alabama and others, you may be aware that Alabama has one of the highest frequencies of gestational diabetes in any state in the country. And research that we have funded indicates that a mother who develops gestational diabetes not only is at a higher risk for ultimately developing diabetes themselves, but the infant who is in that environment during her developing gestational diabetes is also at a subsequent high risk. And that way you can imagine if that individual is a girl, ultimately, when she becomes a mother, she may also pass that down at a younger and younger age. So that certainly is a contributing factor as well. And we're trying to break that cycle through some very innovative research efforts at the moment.
Thank you so much. I see that my time has expired, but just want to tell all of you, you inspire me. Please keep telling your story. Keep being vigilant. And we have work to do up here, and we are certainly committed to doing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And to those of you who are gathered here, whether you are the children in front of us or the supporters, the caregivers, the parents, the friends, thank you. Thank you for your advocacy on behalf of yourself and others. Over the years, I've had so many different visits from young Alaskans who've come to me, and they've got their little story booklet, and there's pictures showing them over the years as they have dealt with their diabetes, but also what they have done as individuals who are brave enough, willing to make the long trip to Washington, D.C. to come and tell their stories. So I join my colleagues up here to encourage you to do more of the same. Somewhere out there is Samantha from Wasilla. There she is right up front there. Sam, I'm looking forward to visiting with you. But it is an effort. It is an effort. And I know that as young kids, you just want to be like everybody else. And everybody else doesn't have an insulin pump. Everybody else doesn't have to prick their finger. Everybody else doesn't have to do what you are going through. Everybody else's moms and dads and caregivers don't worry about them and what is happening with their blood sugar levels. But this is why, again, you need to share your story. You need to make sure that others understand not only what you're going through, but why it's so important that we find that cure, we find that treatment. So thank you for what you continue to do. I want to direct my question here to Dr. Rogers, and many of us have asked this same question along the same lines, Senator Tester, Senator Hyde-Smith, and now just Senator Britt, in trying to understand a little bit more about some of the environmental exposures that may contribute to risk of developing type 1 diabetes. In my state, of course, we're very, very rural in Alaska. We have, in the overall Alaskan population, we have a rate of 7.5% of Alaskans that have diabetes. Alaska Natives have a higher rate at 8.5% of our population, so it is significant for us. I was in the North Slope, which is the furthest north area, small villages up there. Went through the grocery stores, as much as you can call them a grocery stores, but the fact of the matter is there is no fresh produce. In other words, there's no lettuce, there's no carrots, there's no peas, there might be some occasional potatoes, there's no fruit. So how do you get your vegetables? How do you get your fruits? Well, you might get them frozen if you're lucky. You might get your fruit in heavy fructose syrup. But the reality is the diet is a consideration for us and a huge concern. So as you're looking at not only the access in rural areas to health care that can provide for screening, that can provide for that treatment, I'm worried about areas where we're literal food desert when it comes to those healthy foods. And as many in our rural villages have transitioned from subsistence foods to the commercial processed foods, it has resulted in escalating rises of diabetes. So I'm assuming, Dr. Rogers, as you are looking at this in your TEDdy study, this part of your review is also under careful consideration.
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. That is an area that I think we're going to learn from some, general principles that will illuminate a lot of the origin, of this condition, particularly type 1 diabetes. But I think the factors that you just outlined, particularly, food islands or areas, and the types of food really may be pushing up the numbers of individuals at risk for type 2 diabetes as well. And even those with type 1 diabetes, of course, the food is, very important in terms of maintaining, relatively constant levels of blood sugar throughout the day. Our role has really been in trying to develop the science basis to allow you to inform your policy decisions. One of the things that we're doing, that I'll just say quickly, is we have an effort called time-sensitive studies, in which when there's going to likely be a change in policy, for example, the development of rail systems or new food delivery systems or things like that, in an effort to diminish the amount of overweight and obesity, or perhaps making foods better available. And we want to see whether it really does have an impact. We try to get these investigators to get rapidly funded for these studies so they can get baseline information very quickly. And then as policies are enabled or established, one can then study 6 months, a year, 2 years later to really test the hypothesis on the effectiveness of such legislation. So something to sort of keep in mind. We really try to take a multifaceted approach to our research. And again, as I mentioned earlier, rural health is certainly an area of enormous disparities that I think we have to keep our eye on.
Thank you for that. And Madam Chairman, I want to thank you and Senator Shaheen, all those that have been working so aggressively on this. Senator Kennedy articulated very well that the efforts that we're making to reduce the costs of insulin, make it affordable. Well, it may sound like a lot of money. I think when we evaluate and consider the cost to our overall healthcare system, when not properly diagnosed, when not screened early enough, when not given the treatments necessary, those are the costs that are out of sight and are something that we have to address. So I'm with him on his yada, 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 or as I said, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of the same thing. Let's do more than just talk about it. Let's make sure that access is there until we can find the treatment. Thank you for your leadership on this.
Senator Peters, thank you so much for your patience and your graciousness.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And all I can say is, wow. I've never been to a committee hearing like this. I haven't been around all that long, but I've been long enough to know that this doesn't normally happen here in Washington, to see so many people. All of these folks in front of me, all of these young folks, thank you for coming here to Washington. Thank you for making sure your voice is heard. Thank you for your activism. It inspires me to see this, and also shows our democracy is alive and well when we have young folks that are engaged in this. So thank you for being here. Dr. Rogers, ask my first question. And first off, I just want to say I'm grateful to JDRF for its partnership with the Elizabeth Weiser Caswell Diabetes Institute at the University of Michigan in my home state, which is improving health outcomes for people with type 1 diabetes by developing just a comprehensive understanding of type 1 diabetes metabolism in adolescents, in young adults, and as well as people with long-standing type 1 diabetes. The Institute was started by the Weiser Caswell family in Michigan, in which the father and 2 of his 3 sons were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And Elizabeth Caswell became absolutely relentless in her pursuit for more diabetes research, education, and treatment. The JDRF Center of Excellence at the Caswell Diabetes Institute has been identifying new ways to control diabetes and to prevent the absolute devastating consequences of diabetes, allowing them to provide better care as well as health outcomes for people with type 1 diabetes. Specifically, the University of Michigan Center of Excellent Research takes cutting-edge approaches to identifying predictive markers and therapeutic targets for type 1 diabetes complications. The Center of Excellence also studies relationships among metabolic profiles, brain function, and stress, allowing us to identify new ways to minimize the mental health burdens also associated with type 1 diabetes. So my question for you, sir, is how does the Institute at the University of Michigan rely on special diabetes program funding specifically? And what would the Institute be able to accomplish if we increase this funding?
Well, thank you, Senator. I can say that the NIDDK has really been supporting research infrastructure at the University of Michigan for quite some time. In fact, one of the original NIDDK-supported diabetes research center going back to 1977 was at the University of Michigan, and I think they've had substantial funding from that time moving forward. So it really is doing, great work. In terms of type 1 diabetes, in fact, it's doing extremely cutting-edge research. I mentioned earlier about the TrialNet involvement in developing the first drug that's FDA approved that can delay the onset of type 1 diabetes by at least 3 years. Well, one of those major sites is at the University of Michigan. And the University of Michigan is actually also very actively involved in a co-lead, in fact, the SDP-supported Diabetes Foot Consortium, which aims to study the diabetic wound healing. They also actually have a Center for Diabetes Translational Research, in which you work to develop the evidence to then put that into practice and get that implemented. And so there are many, many areas that university should be very proud of, and we're certainly proud of it. So having additional funding will allow some very bright ideas, of which I'm sure there are many, many more at that center and others to move forward. And this SDP support will allow them to sort of, get some of the things that are on the wish list moving forward much more rapidly.
Great, but good to hear. As you've talked about in some of your previous testimony, diabetes is an insidious disease that impacts folks of all age groups. And we have to be thinking about it very broadly about all of the impact that it has. So I just want to ask a quick question related to Medicare and for older adults with Medicare. Medicare will not cover nutrition therapy services for individuals, and you've talked about the importance of nutrition in your testimony. Medical nutrition therapy is not just a critical service for people with diabetes, it also has the potential to help 88 million Americans with prediabetes. So that's why I introduced with Senator Capito, who was here earlier, the Preventing Diabetes in Medicare Act with my colleagues on the committee to extend that coverage, Medicare coverage, for medical nutrition therapy services with pre-diabetes and risk factors for developing type 2 diabetes. Real quickly, Dr. Rogers, do you believe that this coverage is essential and will actually bring down costs in the long run?
Senator, I really can't sort of either discuss or speculate, in terms of the funding of another agency. What I can say is that we have worked with diabetes prevention program, a sort of a landmark study in which we were able to show that either a medication or intensive lifestyle changes in people who have prediabetes, and that lifestyle changes included changes to their nutrition and at least 30 minutes of exercise 5 times a week, greatly reduce one's risk of going from prediabetes, this is type 2 diabetes, to diabetes by some 57%. And the study ultimately led to CMS providing coverage for people over 65 because we had included in this diabetes prevention a substantial number of individuals that could be actually looked at separately and ultimately staff made a calculation that providing this as a benefit for people on Medicare was cost effective, even as early as 2 years. So one component of that is nutrition, but again, I can't begin to speculate on more of that.
Right. Well, thank you. Just in closing for my comments, Madam Chair, is I just again thank you for all of you being here. I think it's clear from what you've been hearing from my colleagues on this committee, we are all committed to attacking this insidious disease. We've got to stay together, be focused on it. But I want to have a hopeful message too, with all of you sitting here in front of me with your bright, smiling faces, which have a great, wonderful life ahead of you. Yes, you do as well. That I think we're probably living in one of the most exciting times in human history, and what you have to look forward to in the years ahead in terms of scientific advances. I mean, we're looking at things like artificial intelligence. We're looking at synthetic biology. We've got all sorts of new technologies that are coming on board that will literally revolutionize our world in very exciting ways. And I am confident as long as we stay together, as long as we lock arms, as long as we speak with one voice, we're going to defeat this disease. We're going to have ability to treat people with diabetes, and we're going to do it together, and we will succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Peters. And I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of your medical nutrition therapy bill. I think it's a great idea. I'm just going to ask very quickly a couple of closing questions because we have a vote on, and I know you need to get on to the rest of your program. Mr. Harris, I wanted to ask a question of you from the perspective of being a parent of a son with type 1, who was diagnosed at such an early age, at age 2. And I would ask you, what advice do you have to other parents? And I'd like you to focus particularly on the Black community, because Black teens have the largest increase in prevalence of type 1 diabetes.
Well, I would say that starting off, it's absolutely a devastating, to find out the news is absolutely devastating. The thing that we really tried to do was make sure that we found a support system of people we could talk to try to gain some knowledge. And that's one of the things that is great about today, is that the awareness, people being aware of it and aware of the need for funding and all of those things is really important. But as a parent, I know the thing that we learned early on is that it's a moving target, trying to keep your numbers correct, trying to keep up with the advances in technology that are happening and all of those kinds of things. And the thing I would just say to parents is don't beat yourself up about it. We actually had a nurse that was helping us, that trained us in how to manage the disease back in the old days, where it was still, the finger pokes and the syringes and all of that. And she actually came to help us one night, and Max actually went low. And this is somebody who's a professional who's teaching people how to, deal with the disease. And she called us in a panic and said, "Oh, he went low." And we said, "Yeah." And so I think having that real world experience helped her as someone who was then teaching other parents. And even the parents I talked to over the last couple of days, that's the thing I've tried to always say to them, is just, it's a moving target. It's not always going to be right, but you figure it out, you deal with it. It's one of those things too, that as soon as you think you've got it figured out, it's, something changes. Because the thing about particularly the young people here today is they're growing. So it's, their bodies are going to change, their attitudes about diabetes are going to change, and all of those things. So I think that the parental support is very important. I think across all communities. I know we talk about insulin affordability. I know that's a big piece of this also, that you have the tools to manage the disease in the right way. And I'm also struck by one of the things that's happening where I think a cure is the destination. And I think we all agree upon that as the destination. Sometimes we disagree, even if we know where the destination is, we disagree on how we're going to get there. What I've been encouraged in this room is that the destination of finding the cure has been the most important thing that we all agree upon. But I also have to say that I love the fact that we're also talking about, I guess, the road to get to the cure, to make sure that that road is an affordable road, that it's a smooth road, as smooth as it can possibly be. And so I just want to say that I am here to support. And my son, Max, was honored by JDRF a few years back, and he said that he vows that he will be here until we find that destination, till we get to that destination of a cure. And the thing that I'm encouraged about with all these young people here is when they look back and 10 years from now or however many years down the road they have kids and they have their families, and they're not going to have these conversations with their kids. It's going to be, what's diabetes? I've never heard of that before.
That'd be great.
That's going to be the nice thing. So, Senator Collins, I want to thank you for having me here today and allowing us all to speak and allowing all these young people to be here, because this is the future. And when diabetes is cured, each and everybody in this room is going to be a part of making that happen.
Thank you. Well said. Elise, I know that Senator Shaheen wanted to be here today. So on her behalf, I'm going to ask you a question, and that is, you live a very active life. You play all these sports. Could you tell us how important it is that the technology that you use allows you to play those sports and to have a very fulfilling, active life?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a challenge, but the technology that we have nowadays helps so much. I'm on the Omnipod, which it has a setting called activity, and I put that on 2 hours before any training or practice or game and 2 hours after, and it basically more closely monitors my blood sugars and gives me less insulin so that I don't go low. And that is so important. It's helped me so much. And that was also funded by the Special Diabetes Program. So I'm really grateful for that. But it's really important to keep continuing that, because playing in sports, you can go dangerously low.
Thank you. That great answer. And my final question is going to be for the president of JDRF. Doctor, we have worked so closely, Senator Shaheen and I, with you on the insulin question. And you have helped us, provided us with expertise in drafting our Insulin Act, which would reform the market to remove all of the perverse incentives that contribute to high prices, plus to put a $35 cap on monthly copays, and I think that is so important. It would also have important patient protection so that you don't have to go through prior approvals and all of the rigmarole that we hear about so often. So we've talked about today that some of the manufacturers have lowered their price to $35. I do think that's in response to our legislation. I'm glad they've done it, but I think that it's our legislation that caused them to do it. So just to get you on the record, do you believe that it's important that we still pass federal legislation like the Insulin Act that Senators Shaheen and I have introduced?
Well, Senator Collins, thank you, and Senator Shaheen, so much for your leadership on this topic. It's the #1 topic I face when I travel around the country, and I'm sure every parent in this room would bend your ear that it's still a problem. We're fully aligned and supportive of the Insulin Act. No one in this country should go for lack of food or rent or a car payment for insulin, which sustains their life. So we commend your work, and we will be supportive, and we look forward to seeing the Insulin Act pass.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I have frequently said that every time I chair the Children's Congress, which I have done many, many times, I leave with a sense of renewed commitment. You inspire me. You saw that you inspired all of the members who are here today, and you can make the difference when you go see your members of Congress and urge them to support the Insulin Act, urge them to support the reauthorization of the Special Diabetes Program, which has been so successful in speeding up new technology that is making your lives better. Ultimately, we want a cure, and that is what we're all working toward. So thank you for coming from all over the country to be with us today, and a special thanks to Maria for coming with her mother from Yarmouth, Maine, to be with us today. With that, this hearing is, I got to get the gavel to make it official. This hearing is now adjourned.